Now, as much as the title might make you think that I hated this movie, that is far from the truth. I found The Perfect Man delightful in some aspects, infuriating in others, but at its core, it's a messy ass movie. All the characters are either messy as hell, for example, Jean and Holly, or are merely ideas to further the plot, and as such, although they look pretty, they don't really get as much depth. For example, Uncle Ben. But ultimately, by the time the credits rolled, I saw The Perfect Man as a whole ass mess of a film that I enjoyed nonetheless, but which I do think that the ending of it was way too imperfect for what the story we got was. But then again, the Locklear has had my heart since I first saw her as Sammy Jo Carrington in Dynasty. So maybe, just maybe, my feelings of rooting for her self esteem and independence clouded my judgment about how I wanted her story to wrap up in this film. But hey, what else can you expect when you put a talented, gorgeous woman on my screen? Now, before I highlight the many ways in which The Perfect Man was messily imperfect and thus a perfect fit for Romcom Ganda Tuesday, I think it's best I introduce what the series is about. So, for those just finding my channel or who are just stumbling on this series for the first time, Romcom Ganda Tuesday is a weekly video series I have on my channel whereby I pick a rom-com from the late 80s to the mid 2010s. Often it's a rewatch, on rare occasions it can be a first time watch. Either way, I watch the film and analyze it to see how well it holds up. Years later, especially viewing them through my now adult and slightly more cynical lens. Now, if this is your first time discovering this series, kindly note that I usually split these videos into three parts: the intro, which is what you're watching right now, the synopsis of the movie, and finally my thoughts. As such, I will have timestamps put in the description bar so you can navigate it as you so choose. Now, before I move on to the synopsis part of the video, I would like to say a big thank you to my lovely patrons and YouTube members whose support have been pretty instrumental in helping me continue to make content, especially since I started doing this full time at the start of last year, which was the last time I was in paid employment. And a special shout out to Kat, Lena, Sherry, and Holly for their extra support. You get all the hearts and kisses too. Mwah, 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 mwah. If you too would like to support me on Patreon or become a YouTube member to enjoy certain perks, even get a shout out, the link to do so is in the description bar. And with that all said and done, The Perfect Man begins with Holly, played by Hilary Duff, unenthusiastically trying on dresses as her best friend tries to get her psyched up for their upcoming school dance. Holly does find it quite hard to walk up any excitement as she's quite firm in her belief that her family wouldn't be around for much longer. She's never been to a school dance as a result of that. Turns out that Ollie is quite right because at the moment her mother, Jean, played by Heather Locklear, Jean's latest boyfriend, had arrived at their front door to break the news that he had been cheating on her. She responds by rightfully smashing the cake she had been baking in his face and breaks up with him. This then follows a week of sad Patsy Cline music playing in the house, after which Jean boxes up their things and does what Holly informs us is her mother's MO. She has them moving to a whole new city for a fresh start. This time around, their fresh start takes them to Brooklyn, where Jean has a new job at a local bakery and Holly is once again starting afresh at the local high school. There she meets Amy, who connects with her via their matching boots. And whilst Amy is telling her about everything going on in school and what Ollie is expected to participate in, Ollie is just going through the motions as she's just waiting for her mother to do what Jean does best, which is to force them to relocate at the end of the day. Again, possibly sometime soon after she's gotten her heart broken yet again. Ollie also gets to meet Adam, a new classmate who is quite the talented comic artist and who also clearly has a crush on her. Amy, meanwhile, drags Ollie along with her to her uncle's upscale bistro where they get to meet said Uncle Ben, played by Chris Noth, and his advice makes Ollie realize just how well Ben knows women and would even be considered the perfect man, which is a step up from his character as Big. I'm just saying, Carrie Bradshaw would snap up Ben in a heartbeat. Although it doesn't have the level of messiness that she enjoys in her relationship. So maybe they might not get along as well as she had hoped, even though Ben has Big's face. Anyway, sorry, I digress. Ollie, after listening to Ben talk about the significance of flowers, specifically orchids, gets one for her mother and addresses it as being from a secret admirer. You see, Holly's plan is to create a fictional perfect man for Jean that would ensure that her mother doesn't fall for the first loser that shows interest in her and would then ultimately break her heart in a couple of months, all for the goal of them being able to settle in Brooklyn for as long as possible. Now, why Ollie doesn't consider what would later happen should Jean not be able to actually meet this perfect man, seeing that he does not actually exist, is beyond me. But then again, she's 16, so well, anyway, it turns out that orchids are Jane's favorite flower, and she finds herself falling for this fictional man. And because this secret admirer seemingly caught sight of her at work, she finds herself looking around trying to get at his identity when she's at work, which is when Lenny, who also works at the bakery that she's at, but in the bread section, shows up with a yellow rose, and Jean decides that he might be the secret admirer. Like someone who would give her an orchid in one breath will turn around and give her a rose in the other, but that is Jean for you. So she agrees to go on a date with Lenny, who takes her to a Styx tribute concert, and when they get back, he proceeds to smash her face in a kiss. Holly, realizing with horror that her mother might just get with Lenny, decides to amp things up. So, with Amy in tow, she heads back to Ben with a recorder in hand and basically quizzes him on who the perfect man is and exactly how it would behave and woo a woman like her mother. It's a very nice case of foreshadowing of the catastrophe that would soon ensue. That the examples of romantic heroes that Holly mentions on the spot is Heathcliff and Romeo. Like, girl, the writing's on the wall. Anyway, armed with new information about how the perfect man would behave, Ollie proceeds to send her mother gifts, starts to email her from her classmate Adam's computer. Of course, since the whole point is to keep her mother from finding out the truth. Hell, thanks to a little nudging from Adam, she even takes it a step further and starts IMing her mother as Ben, and the two of them have a heart-to-heart chat where Jean comes clean about how she feels like a failure of a mother, well aware of her mistakes, and she even tells Ben about giving up her dreams in order to have a daughter Holly, but it's a choice she would never regret because her daughters are everything to her. This, of course, gets to Holly, who is pretending to be Ben, and she and her mother draw even closer, although Jean doesn't know that, her daughter has been pretending to be Ben, and so found out about all of this backstory. Now, to keep the ruse going, Holly even takes a picture of a clueless Uncle Ben when Jean mentions that she doesn't even know what this Ben person looks like, and sends said picture to her mother with a lie that Ben is in China expanding his restaurant business, hence why they start to communicate via email and get along very well. Now, things become even more complicated when Holly learns that her mother is headed to Ben's bistro for a bridal shower of one of her colleagues, and Hilda from Melissa John Art's Sabrina the Teenage Witch. Terrified at the thought of Ben and her mother meeting, she sends Amy off to the bistro to create a distraction if needed and heads over to Ben's apartment to see if he's at home. Luckily, he is. And even better, she discovers that he too, like her mother, loves working on the Times Sunday crossword puzzle. And like her mother, he too fills in his answers with a pen. This makes her start to realize that Ben really might be the perfect man for her mother. But then Ben gets a call that has him heading to the bistro to solve an issue with a broken down appliance. To ensure that he and Jean don't accidentally run into each other whilst in the same space, Ollie turns on the sprinkler system, which evacuates the entire restaurant. Realizing that the fictional man she's created might keep Jean from meeting her actual perfect man in Ben, she convinces Adam to call their landline pretending to be Ben so that he can break up with her mother, since doing so via email to her is too impersonal. Teenagers, I swear. Adam reluctantly agrees, but then when he calls, he's looking at a picture of Holly on his computer and just about declares his feelings for her whilst pretending to be Ben talking to Jean. This, as expected, infuriates Holly, who confronts Adam the next day at school, and he responds by kissing her, thus confessing his feelings towards her. And as if Holly doesn't already have enough on her plate, Lenny shows up that very same night with a boombox in hand and publicly proposes to Jean. God, I hate public proposals. Also important to note that Jean has only gone on one date with this dude and had told him afterwards that she was interested in someone else. Anyway, Jean responds by telling Lenny maybe, which then has Holly calling the landline, pretending to be Ben's assistant to set up a date at the Brooklyn Bridge between Ben and Jean. Now, with that done, she heads over to the bistro. But when she hears that Ben is with Amber at the church for the wedding, she runs and bursts in, declaring that he cannot marry Amber since he's the perfect man for her mother. However, the groom is not Ben, but someone else. But Amber, who now believes her soon-to-be husband has been cheating on her, punches her groom in the face, at which point Ollie pulls a oopsie, my bad, and skedaddles. Ben chases after her, and Ollie spills the beans to him. To his confusion, she also then heads over to the bridge to tell her mother the truth, and Jean is left feeling very devastated and disappointed and humiliated as well. As if that's not bad enough, when Holly gets to school, Adam hands her a comic he's drawn of her as a princess who pushes everyone away, and that turns out to be the last straw for her as she gets home and informs her mother that this time around, she's the one that wants them to move. The Hamiltons start packing, but then Adam shows up and hands the comic that is now framed to Jean and asks Jean to pass it on to Holly and to tell Ollie that she should turn over the comic to the other side. After Adam leaves, Jean does so and sees that the second half of the comic is a drawn version of Adam telling Holly that he would always be by her side regardless. Later that night, Adam logs onto his messenger IM chat and Jean decides to take a utterly bonkers page from her 16-year-old's diary and messages Adam whilst pretending to be Holly. You cannot make this shit up. Talk about an absolute mess. Anyway, Adam points out to her that to who he thinks is Holly, that following her mother's bad example of running away from her problems might not be the best choice, and this gives Jean the kick in the pants she needs to not only choose to say, but to also refuse to budge when Ollie is insistent that she wants them to move. She eventually has a chat with her daughter where they clear up the air, and she gives good motherly advice for once in the movie. And she also hands Holly Adam's drawing and passes on Adam's words that there are always two sides to every story. And when Holly flips the artwork over, she smiles as she realizes what Adam was trying to tell her. With the Hamiltons making the decision not to leave, Zoe enters a spelling bee competition which she excels at. Jean wins a baking competition that she signed up for and gets a snazzy job at an upscale bakery as a result. And Holly brings over Ben, who after reading the printed out email exchanges between fictional him and Jean that Ollie had given him after the weird-ass almost wedding thing, after the mess of the wedding, he finds himself intrigued by Jean and wants to meet her. Thus, Jean gets to meet her perfect man and the two agree to go on their first date. Holly, meanwhile, who is now dating Adam, agrees to go on her first ever school dance with him. The end. You know, when I was chatting with some friends about this movie, the consensus was often to blame Hilary Duff's Holly for her choices in this film, like she's the only villain in it. In fact, quite a significant number of them felt that she was the only one at fault. And to be fair, I can understand where they are coming from. She is messy. Holly's the one who decided to create a fake admirer for her mother and threw herself wholeheartedly into selling that lie. She bought her mother orchids, wrote her a love letter alongside music she believed she would love, and Jean did. She danced around the apartment with her two daughters, having a blast, unaware that all of this was the machinations of her eldest daughter. Holly sent her mother emails, weeks of them chatting back and forth. She IM'd her, got her friend from school to act like said admirer for the sole purpose of breaking her mother up with this imaginary man that she, being her mother, of course, had no idea didn't exist. But Holly could now sense said imaginary boyfriend was keeping her mother from actually getting the chance to meet the man she could love, a man that Holly felt was perfect for her. When we examine Holly's actions from that light, it's pretty easy to chalk it up as her being manipulative, because to be quite honest, that is what she was for a lot of the movie. Hell, one can even toss in the fact that she was being extremely selfish as well. I mean, when you really consider it, this is a girl who based the imaginary boyfriend that she created for her mother off of her best friend, Amy's Uncle Ben. And when it looked like they were about to meet, which would have revealed her lie, she was so desperate to keep it going that she triggered the sprinklers in Ben's restaurants by lighting a fire beneath them, effectively dousing the entire space in water, chasing off his customers who were terrified of being caught in a fire within such a small space. I know she looked sad at the fact that she had done something hurtful, but I wonder if she was even really aware of the extent of how damaging her actions were in that moment. I mean, think of the cost. Think of how much Ben would have lost that day. Not just the customers that had to rush out, but everything that would need to be refitted in that restaurant because it all got drenched. I mean, if there had actually been a fire, it wouldn't have been so bad because better safe than sorry. And of course, Ben looks like the kind of person who definitely insured his space. So I don't think Ollie was thinking about any of that. Hell, even if she thought Ben didn't have insurance for his restaurant, I doubt if she would have cared either way. For her in that moment, it wasn't about the bridal shower that she had ruined or the weeks without income that would follow the restaurant being closed for repairs and to get everything up and running again. None of that mattered to her as much as her mother never finding out the truth. But of course, when she realized just how much of a perfect match Ben was for her mother, Holly, without thinking yet again, or even considering just how unfair or selfish it would be, shows up at what she thought was Ben's wedding to Amber to declare that Ben was more perfect for her mother and more in sync with her. And so Ben should be marrying Jean, a woman who, mind you, up until this point, this poor man had never met, had zero idea about. And here is this girl at a wedding declaring that he should, to her, leave his about to be married bride at the altar and follow her instead to be introduced to her mother, who she believes would be perfect for him because he is her mother's perfect man. I swear, when we got to that scene, I wanted to get a peek into Holly's brain and ask the very important question of, is it crack? Because it has to be. She has to be on drugs. There is no way her thought process could have been fueled by anything but sheer crack cocaine to believe that anything she was saying in that moment was not batshit insane. Of course, we do end up discovering pretty quickly that Ben was not getting married to Amber. Instead, she's one of his very good friends and he was just there to cater her wedding. It still doesn't take away from the fact that Holly created a whole ass mess thinking that they were about to get married. And it was a mess that was not just for her mother, but for Ben and for poor Amber, who was caught in the middle of it. Because for a moment there, she really thought that Holly, who had barged in without mentioning the name of the supposed man that was perfect for her mother, by the way, was addressing her soon to be husband. And so Amber punched the poor guy in the face. Like, can you imagine being in the audience of the wedding? The groom's being knocked on his ass. The bride is furious. And then there's this pipsqueak of a girl who goes, oops, wrong wedding, and runs away. I would have been shaking my head. Entertained whilst at the same time being grateful to all the gods that she was not pulling that shit at my wedding. I mean, it's a mess. It's selfish. She's selfish. But also, she's 16. And I know someone is about to type out that, well, she's old enough to know better. And maybe she is, but she's also a 16-year-old girl who is navigating this world the only way in which she knows how to. With a mother who, to be quite honest, was quite inept with her care. And before anyone wants to come for me for that, please really think about it. The onus and responsibility was on Jean to take care of her children and ensure that their needs are met as the parent in the household. Constantly uprooting your children's life every couple of months because you got your heart broken and desired a change of scenery is absolute bullshit. Like, I get it if it was that maybe the person she was dating was, I don't know, the mayor of the city. And so she had to leave the city immediately after the breakup. But constantly moving every time a jackass broke her heart, it's just shitty parenting behavior. And I say this as someone who, for about 5 years when I was a child, my parents moved around a lot. Like every year, I always had to start the new school year in a new school, trying to build my friendships all over again. It sucked. And it is awful, especially when your parent is doing so not because of a good and concrete, albeit flawed reason, like maybe they had to move around for work, but because of their own fucking ineptitude. And yes, I do consider my parents, specifically my dad, for moving us around all the time when I was a kid because he had financial issues and always had to move, as being inept. Child me didn't know better. Adult me knows how irresponsible he was. And so maybe that is the reason why I can give Ollie some grace. Is she messy and selfish? Yes. But she's also just a child trying to find a way to get herself a new normal, trying to get her mother to settle in and not upend their life yet again because she's reached her limit and was tired of it all. So as much as I know that she did a lot of things that were out of pocket, I refuse to villainize her for it, especially when she's not the only messy person in their household. I mean, Jean is right there. Because say what you will, but come on, constantly deciding to pack your shit up and move every single time a man breaks up with you is just messy. Actually opening your mouth to imply to your daughters, your impressionable daughters, that you can't see yourself living on your own 2 feet, that you need the support of a man, and that is why you're so desperate to find love is just irresponsible as a parent. I mean, what on earth is she teaching Holly and Zoe about their own self worth? It's crazy to me because, like, Jean is a gorgeous woman. I mean, that is Heather Locklear, for Christ's sake. She's been stunning since the fucking 80s. She's a gorgeous woman who is talented, remarkably talented at what she does. And yet, she's so desperate that she will turn a parents teacher meeting into a way to finagle some sort of gathering for single parents because, in her words, she needs a man. I swear, just like Holly in that scene, I wanted to die. I wanted to sink into the floor in secondhand embarrassment. Let me tell you, the old well, a donut van broke down, and so nobody's thinking about your mom's highly inappropriate question at last night's meeting is hogwash. That was done just because the movie is meant to be a teen-aged rom-com. Because let me tell you this, if that was a regular high school, nobody would have forgotten such prime humiliation fuel. Holly would have been mocked and bullied for that until she graduated or left the school. That would have been the name the entire school would have known her by. And all because her mother was so desperately in need of a man that she lost all her self-respect and didn't even think of her daughter. I mean, when you consider Holly as a selfish person within the story, with a mother like Jean, you kind of get where she's coming from and why Holly is the type of person she is. And before anybody wants to point out that Holly manipulated her mother, I am not disputing that. I would just like to point out that this same mother, when Holly points out just how inappropriate her behavior was at the parent-teacher school meeting, tried to gaslight her daughter into believing that she did it for the greater good of all, which we all collectively know, as Holly does, is absolute and utter bullshit. Hell, what kind of mother doesn't actually listen to the valid concerns her 16-year-old raises about her rushing into a relationship with Lenny? I mean, think about it. They barely just moved to New York. She just got her job. Lenny asked her out, a co-worker. And whilst Jean is aware that she's not utterly mad for Lenny and is not the best match for her, she's willing to settle because at least he's someone who is interested in her, which, once again, I get that her self-esteem is in the gutter, but I would still like to point out is her way of subtly teaching her daughters to settle for less than, because to her that is always better than not having a man at all, which I call bullshit on. Her parenting skills is a mess. I repeat, her parenting skills is a mess. What I would say, though, just as we saw with Holly, is that we get to understand the why of her behavior. Jean is fairly young and she has a 16-year-old daughter, so we can deduce that she had Holly at a pretty young age, just before she got to go to culinary school and pursue her dream of being a master baker. That love derailed her from that with a pregnancy is something that I could empathize with. She's a woman who did the best she can with the hand she was dealt, and that is something that hit me in the gut. It's not easy being a single parent. Do I think it justifies her being reckless with the men she dated? Because ultimately, if she had followed through with any of them, if they are taking the Lenny approach and proposed to her, for example, that would mean that she was bringing these men, these low lives, according to Holly and even Jean herself, she's bringing them into the lives of her daughters as parental figures. And that is just irresponsible to me. But at the same time, I can understand where she's coming from and what is driving her. And that is the reason why the end of the movie was such a mess in my book. Because initially, when Ben shows up and Jean recognizes him, he asks her out. And while she's flattered, she turns him down, explains that she's at the stage in her life where she's finding and figuring out herself and doing well for herself. And so she doesn't want to rush into a relationship at that point. And when she said that, I cheered because, yes, I do think that Jean Hamilton is an amazing, brilliant woman, and I was rooting for her to come to that realization, the fact that she can have a complete and fulfilling life without needing a man, and that, maybe she and Ben could take a couple of years apart, let Jean be fully settled into her own self, having found her self-worth and realize what she's capable of accomplishing and maintaining without a man, since it's the desperation of her needing a man that has gotten them all into so much trouble in the past. I thought she had learned the core lesson, like that was the core lesson for her from the film, and that was what we were going to get at the end. Her making that stance with a wink of maybe Ben and Jean being able to get together sometime in the future. But the writers lived up to their messy ass consistency with this movie and had it end with Ben giving a time for the date and Jean accepting with a smile. And when I say I face palmed hard at that, I mean, we could have had it all rolling in the deep. You had my heart inside of your hand, and you played it to the beat. So I just had to. The heartbreak I felt at the end of this movie. Of course, there were other characters that kept the mess going throughout this film. We cannot forget Lenny, the bread man, with his cheesy ass lines. And I know Michael Malley was fun as hell, but God, was he as desperate as Jean and also as one track minded? Because, boy, how on earth would you drag a girl you like to what you first told her was a Styx concert, which, unless you knew she was a big Styx fan, doesn't immediately scream romance. But then she even gets there. And it's not a Styx concert, but a tribute by a local band, even though the lead singer for said local band is Dennis Young. But hey, in movie universe, it was a nobody. Like, you bring her to this tribute concert, have her walk barefoot because you don't want her shoes messing up your car, and immediately believe that she's in love with you. And then you have this public proposal, singing and shit, to try and strong arm her into marrying you weeks after you had done some public humiliation ritual at your mutual place of work, accusing her of breaking your heart. And I'm just, every time Lenny showed up, I knew it was for comedic effect. But at the same time, I just kept screaming, "Get the fuck away from her, Leonard." God damn it, a whole ass mess. It's like this movie wanted to highlight just how perfect fictional Ben was, that they didn't even give poor Lenny a chance. They turned him into a total joke. And I can see why Holly was so desperate to not have him become her stepfather. I am just saying. Honestly, the only person who wasn't really a mess was Ben. But then again, Ben was meant to be perfect. Zoe was also perfect. Baby girl just wanted to stay in a city long enough to be entered for a spelling bee contest at school. And that just broke my heart because, come on, G, what kind of mother doesn't even consider that for her kid? And of course, I think Adam was a bit of a mess because, goddamn it, how strong must your crush be to actually temporarily agree to the insanity that is you pretending to be your classmate's mother's pen pal slash boyfriend who is calling to break up with her? Like, I'm happy he didn't go through with it, but damn, Holly really put that boy through it. She also put her bestie Amy through it, what with the dragging the poor girl into her shenanigans that is faking her mother's relationship with Ben. But you know what? Should things work out with Ben and Jean, Amy and Holly would practically become sisters, cousins. Either way, their friendship bonds would become stronger as a result. So I guess that works. And shout out to the absolute mess that was Carson Kressley's Lance in this movie, who was basically a glorified gay stereotype, but who, just like everybody else, was searching for love. Even if he spent more time staring into, like, wine glasses and fixing his hair. But of course, these are all just my thoughts. I would as always love to hear yours. Whether or not you agree with me, please share them in the comments. Like this video, however, if you've watched this far and haven't done so yet, but enjoyed anything of what I had to say, share it so others can find my channel as well. Or you can check out my gaming or ASMR channels if they sound like something you might potentially possibly be interested in. I have them both linked in the description bar. I will see you tomorrow with a new video. Until then, do remember, obsessing over the things you love, perfectly valid coping mechanism.